I just realized, yes, clicker. Sorry. So, hello and welcome everyone to our final Learning Lab of 2023. I thought I wasn't going to be able to make it here today, but the tides turned in my favor. So our final Learning Lab this year is Learning by Your Doing, How Tourism Training Australia is Creating Flexible Learning Pathways in TVET through Micro-Credentials. And this will be followed by a regional, a regional discussion on micro-credentials for tackling skills shortages. So before we get started, a few housekeeping points for those of you that are joining us today online just for this Learning Lab. It will be available also in French translation. To access the translation services, you can toggle the Français button. And we are asking that if you have any questions, please pose them using the chat function, and this will also be recorded. If you have questions also, please make sure to direct them at a specific speaker. So what are the BILT Learning Labs? Through highlighting innovative initiatives, BILT Learning Labs are designed to show the different stakeholder perspectives that support, help to develop, and benefit from these unique TVET practices. Learning Labs foster an interactive learning experience with the goal of helping participants understand ways they could also incorporate such practices into their own TVET work. We have a very ambitious agenda today. Normally, our Learning Labs feature one panel discussion and Q&A, but today we're going to try to have two panel discussions and two Q&As. First, we're going to hear from Tourism Training Australia and their digital micro-credentials platform. And after a short Q&A, we will then move to our regional panel discussion, followed by a longer Q&A where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions to all of our speakers today. Micro-credentials are a worldwide phenomenon and are ever growing in both TVET and continuing professional education. For example, according to OECD, between 2018 and 2022, there was a 217% increase of online courses that were labeled as micro-credentials on 5 of the major learning platforms. Let me repeat that. 217% increase in 5 years. Why? What exactly are micro-credentials, and why are they seen as being relevant to the future of TVET? This is a complicated question, and the answers vary depending on who is asked. In the interest of time, I have chosen to focus on one common definition that was derived by a global panel of 47 experts under the overall supervision of Borheen Chakroun, the director of the Division of Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO. Through the analysis of multiple global descriptions, this common definition is an attempt to distill what experts agree that they agree on so far about micro-credentials. A micro-credential is a record of a focused learning achievement, verifying what a learner knows, understands, and can do. Focused in this sense means targeting a specific sense of learning outcomes in a narrow field of learning and achieving it over a shorter period of time. A micro-credential includes assessment based on clearly defined standards and is awarded by a trusted provider. Standardized assessment by a credible, recognized institution can refer to a variety of providers, may they be public or private, not-for-profit or for-profit, and including providers outside the formal education system. A micro-credential has stand-alone value and may also contribute to or complement other micro-credentials or macro-credentials, including through recognition of prior learning. In other words, a micro-credential is usable on its own, but they also provide added value to existing qualifications or acknowledge prior learning. As per Peter Telia just mentioned, here in Germany alone, we have 2 million who are working but have no current recognition of qualifications. Furthermore, micro-credentials can be stacked, as in logically combined. Finally, a micro-credential meets the standards required by relevant quality assurance. This last point takes up a tough nut of quality assurance in the face of a variety of providers and sectors. However, following agreed and transparent quality standards is particularly important for trust building and recognition. Given the potential for flexibility and transportability, a lot of hopes are currently being pinned to micro-credentials, changing the way we learn and certify knowledge. They are often seen as instrumental in supporting upskilling, reskilling, and multi-skilling, particularly as it applies to new technologies and the green and digital transformation, where there are ever-evolving skills demands. In this case, shorter, flexible, targeted training formats are seen as complementing traditional TVET. Micro-credentials could also be used to facilitate access to TVET through recognition of prior learning, as widening, as well as widening pathways to higher education, and as such could be instrumental in promoting social inclusion among disadvantaged learners and workers. Furthermore, as pointed out yesterday by Koen Nomendien of the European Commission, micro-credentials are also being seen as playing a key role in the future of lifelong learning policies. Finally, if micro-credential programs are built around cross-border recognition schemes, they can also encourage internationalization and labor market mobility. The freedom associated with micro-credentials means that they can be acquired before, during, after, or as part of, or in addition to, or even, dare I say, as a replacement to formalized TVET programs. That said, I want to also stress that these are still the early days. The benefits and pitfalls of micro-credentials have yet to be proven in many cases. For example, there has been little investigation into whether micro-credentials are well understood by learners and their employers, not to mention the potential for de-skilling those moving between labor markets, and larger concerns over the destabilization of traditional TVET institutions. One thing that most can agree upon, just like AI and its applications as a Learning 4.0 tool, further research into micro-credentials is needed. With this background in mind, I think we are now more than ready to hear about a concrete example of micro-credentials from our friends at Tourism Training Australia. This innovative learning practice was brought to our attention through the work of the 2023 BILT expert group on the dual transition in hospitality and tourism sectors. So our speakers for today, starting us off with our pitch, will be Mr. John Hart. John has been working for over 30 years in the tourism and hospitality industry in a variety of roles. Always one to wear many hats, John is currently the Executive Chair for the Australian Chamber of Tourism, the Chair of Australian Grape and Wine, the Chair of the National Tourism Industry Training Committee, a board member of the Australian Business Register, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, and the non-executive director of the Angus Knight Group. He was also awarded in 2021 an Order of Australia Medal for his service to tourism. For our panel discussion, we will be joined by Ms. Venessa Barnes, Marketing Lead at Tourism Training Australia, Mr. Suresh Manikiman, the Chief Executive Officer at Restaurant and Catering Australia, and Mr. Jim Syrmas, Project Manager of the Workplace Training and Innovation Fund, Syrmas Consultant. A warm welcome to all of our speakers, and with that, I would like to pass the floor to John.
Can I say to all that I'm very sorry not to be there in person. I'm missing all the fun that you're having in Bonn, and I would dearly have loved to be there. So greetings to all. Now through some slides that will take us again through the micro-credential program that we're operating at Tourism Training Australia, and then some of my colleagues will be able to join me in answering some questions on the project itself. So if we could move to the next slide. This is a graphic that demonstrates what we call now the visitor economy or the tourism economy in Australia. 4 key sectors, and each of those sectors I will very briefly mention in terms of where we are in our process of rebuilding our industry. To the next slide, please. The first area is hospitality, and this is a look at the hospitality sector. The point of the graph, you can see there the 2019 levels of turnover across the sector. I've drawn a trend line there that shows that the trend line is substantially under where our recovery has taken us, and we've now already over a third more turnover in the hospitality sector in Australia than we were in 2019. To the next slide, please. We are also considerably greater in turnover through our inbound tourism channel, and we've seen a very fast recovery of international visitation into Australia. The next slide, please. We've seen a very significant increase in domestic tourism, and you can see in the chart there on the right, you have the 2023 turnover, a combination of domestic and international tourism that is sizably above where we were in 2019. The next slide, please. Similarly, we have a very stark growth in inbound and outbound travel from Australia. This graph looks at employment across those sectors, and you can see in the dotted line across the top that we're now over on the right-hand side of the graph, the number of people employed in our sector are marginally greater than we had in 2019. The next slide, please. Just showing us is that there is some incredible demand for tourism and hospitality services in Australia. This graph shows the percentage of businesses reporting vacancies across each of the industry sectors in our economy. You can see accommodation and food services sitting right up the top as the industries for whom there are greater numbers of vacancies than any other of our industries. What this means for us is that our workforce is under great pressure, and we need to change the way we're doing things to cope with that incredible growth in tourism and hospitality demand across the board in our sectors in Australia. The next slide, please. We have to change the way that we train people for our industries. If you look at these 3 graphics, they demonstrate the way in which we learn. Apprenticeship is, of course, a very significant combination across a learning platform and a work platform. We are learning at the same time as working, and by the time you get to the end of your apprenticeship, you are working in a business in which you have learnt your craft. In a cadetship model, traditionally more of a higher education model than a TVET model, you have a block of learning, a block of integrated learning and work, and then a block of work at the end. These traditional models train people before they are going to use the skills in the workplace. Whilst there's a blending of learning and work, it is substantially upfront learning progressing into work. Is that the way we work in the current environment, substantially because of the pressures in our workforce, is that in a working environment, there is learning that needs to be undertaken all the time. And that learning is just in time. It's gaining a skill the moment that you need it. Not a lot of pre-learning, not a lot of overlearning, that is gaining skills that you're not going to immediately use in the workplace. Today, we have a just-in-time training environment where you need to gain the skills that you need to do a task in the workplace at the time you need them. Yes. Created a framework of micro-credentials that provides exactly that learning when it is needed. So if you just click through the next slide, you'll need to keep clicking through this slide to show what I mean by this. It is not a linear progression. It is gaining skills at the very time you need them as you're getting a challenge in the workplace. And our micro-credential platform is based on gaining those skills at the moment that you need them. And the system that underpins our micro-credential framework is about identifying when you need those skills. Please. Are platformed in a way that individual learners can use those micro-credentials to solve a business problem at a point in time. They are all platformed on a platform that allows the use of multiple devices, from mobile phones to tablets to PCs, and they are all 10 to 15 minutes in duration. It is designed very specifically to give the skills you need at a point in time. Now, if we click through the next slide, we should have the video connected here. This video will just guide us very quickly through one of the micro-credentials. So if we can click in the middle of that to launch the video, I think that's... Just take us through and I'll talk you through it as the video plays. So you'll see here that you've got one of the micro-credentials, which is coaching techniques in action. You'll see that the videos bring the learner into an environment where they're hearing from colleagues, where they're able to access what they're hearing in an accessible way. We can then allow them to look at examples of interactions that they might have. They have questioning processes that are embedded in those micro-credentials, and then questions that draw out experiences that they will have in the workplace. This is all then gathering information from the learner that is then captured so that they can guide their own way through a learning journey. Again, that journey is 10 to 15 minutes, but highly interactive and very much drawing on experiences that they will have in the workplace. Every single part of what's learnt there is not only interactive, but able to be accessible. That is, it is in writing as well as visual on the screen. It will take each learner through those scenarios and ask them for questions and test as they're going through the micro-credential so that evidence is being gathered to make an assessment judgment, which I'll come to a bit later on. So you can see there's lots of imagery, lots of questions, lots of interaction, and all of those micro-credentials are built in a way that not only gathers evidence, but presents information in a very, very simple but engaging way. This micro-credential is part of the framework of programs that we've designed to meet specific needs. That is, this one talks about coaching. It's designed to be served up to individual employers that are looking for information on how they can best retain employees. So they're being guided through how they get a coaching arrangement in place where they can bring out skills in the people that are working for them. The slides, if we can, and just click through this slide if you can. Really important here, even though there's not a linear transition between each of the micro-credentials, there is a stacking arrangement where, as each of those pieces of learning are accumulated, a recognised unit of competency is arrived at the end of the relevant micro-credentials. Now, they may be achieved in any order. That is, they'll have some from stack 1, some from stack 3, 5, whatever it is. They're being guided through what meets their needs at a point in time, but still are able to stack them towards recognition in units of competency. To the next slide, please. You'll see in the breakdown of the different micro-credentials that we've designed them around immediate needs that we have at this point in time, at this time when we're rebuilding our workforce. So determining event feasibility, we've had, as we came out of the period of COVID restrictions, some really big changes in the way events were undertaken, different ways of costing, quoting, and different methodologies, particularly the emergence of additional digital technologies for costing, preparing quotes, and looking at how that translates into organising an event. Social and cultural sensitivity. Off the back of the COVID restrictions, there was great issues in our country around social cohesion because of the lockdowns we had and so on. So some real effort there in how to get those social and cultural sensitivities brought to the fore. Coaching others in job skills. Again, as we rebuild, we really need to focus on retention of our staff being employers of choice. The next slide, please. Customer service experiences that are both online customer service experiences and face-to-face experiences as part of our cluster of micro-credentials, and then recruiting, selecting and inducting staff. We've turned over throughout the period of restrictions to today somewhere around 400,000 staff across the industry. We've had to re-recruit, rebuild, and these micro-credentials are a vital part about how we do that. Next slide, please. Monitoring work operations, really looking at the use of new technologies, the way those technologies interplay with providing quality customer service, how they interplay with professional development and growing business excellence, and how those products can be used for mentoring and supervising in the workplace. Obviously, putting staff onto a training pathway by, once again, being able to address their immediate business needs. Next slide, please. Micro-credential that is undertaken receives a digital badge that is verified, and there's a process of verifying that the individual that's undertaking the micro-credential is legitimate, and the digital badging process is a verified process so that once that micro-credential is accumulated with others, stacks towards a unit of competency, there is a legitimisation of who is achieving those micro-credentials and the fact that they are really doing the work that they need to do, and the evidence is being gathered on their performance. Please. Providing the insight as to what needs individuals have in a point of time, remembering that we're in a world of work where individual needs for solving individual business problems are being provided through our micro-credential program. What this application does is determines through an AI process what the specific needs of a specific person is at a point in time. And we do this by looking at what they're doing in the social media. We look at this from the perspective of what they're doing online, what they're searching, how they're interrogating information, and where they're going to try and solve a business problem. So, for instance, if they're going through a process of advertising for a staff member, we will then be able to serve them up a micro-credential for 10 minutes saying, try this micro-credential that will provide you with some information on how to recruit better, sources of recruitment, digital solutions to recruiting people, how to use social media to find the right people for the jobs that you're recruiting for. And then we'll follow them through that recruitment journey and provide them a platform to undertake further work. So once we've given them a micro-credential on recruitment, then on selection, then on onboarding, then on coaching and mentoring, and giving them the information that's going to guide them through that recruitment journey. Next slide, please. Guided through that journey, you can see here a fairly complex flowchart that explains how we profile users to tell us at what point in the journey is that person at. So if they've, again, gone through that recruitment process, we know that we can now serve them up a solution to a business problem on selection after they've been through recruitment and coaching, then mentoring, then guiding them through business operations. All this is designed to make sure we're solving the problem that they have at a point in time. Next slide, please. They've accumulated those micro-credentials that they need to make up a unit of competency. We will then move them into the next part of our skills ecosystem, where if they then have another business problem, we'll guide them through that next journey. All the while, we're validating the competency that they're achieving through the micro-credentials that they're undertaking, remembering that those micro-credentials are not delivered in a linear fashion. We're not saying this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one. We are simply saying we will identify what your business problems are that need a solution, and we will serve those up. And at a point in time when you've reached the completion of a stack, we will give you recognition in the formal training system. Next slide, please. Through an AI solution that sits at the back of our framework, and we keep retargeting people and building our information base on each of our participants so that we can better target them with the needs that they have in a point of time. This is not about selling a solution to their business needs. Next slide, please. Have a situation where we are moving multiple employees and employers through our system, building those achievements in the various micro-credentials, and the AI engine is continuously learning about the people in our workplace. From here, we're going to build up the model. We are working on a whole new suite of micro-credentials to ensure that we are giving a service to individual employees that need to build their knowledge, need to become professional, need to be able to build capacity in our industry without going back to that traditional over-learning model where we had people studying for years prior to putting in place skills in the workforce. They are in the workplace, they are learning and gaining skills on the job at the time they need them. This is the only way we're going to be able to deal with the workforce challenges that we face. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I would like you to stay with us, and I'd also like to call to the stage Ms. Venessa Barnes, as well as ask Jim and Suresh to join us as well online, and we'll open our panel discussion. Thank you. Okay, great. I think we're all here. My apologies, it's not the coziest of panel discussions here with the tables, but we will try our best. So thank you once again so much, John, for that insightful presentation about your platform. I'd like to start us off having a discussion regarding a point that you actually had mentioned, the just-in-time training that we see now, or also what's known as a skills-first approach. Formal TVET has traditionally centered around teaching for a specific profession, career, or degree with an end goal. But now we're seeing, as you pointed out, this just-in-time training is starting to take hold more. So when you took the decision to develop your micro-credentials platform, were there any specific concerns or hesitations that you dealt with in choosing this model rather than sticking with more of a traditional approach? And moreover, did you receive any pushback because of choosing the non-traditional skills-first approach, particularly from government or trade unions?
Okay. You want me to go, guys, first?
Go right ahead, Jim.
Okay. Look, I suppose before we get too far into it, we've got to provide the context in what this project was developed. It was part of a state government initiative in Australia called the Workforce Training Innovation Fund. The fund was designed to encourage partnerships between industry bodies and training providers to examine, trial, any innovative approaches to improve the accessibility of the accessibility, relevance, and delivery of workplace skills to support productivity and learning development. So that was in the context that we developed or started to design this project. The TTA project was initially looking to respond to a recognised workforce skills gap, as John said earlier, that targeted owners, operators, managers of SME, tourism, travel and hospitality businesses. And as part of our development, we were looking at covering all sectors of the industry. And this was in, I suppose, a post-COVID need to build their capability to sustain their business operations, to adapt their business to survive with what had happened through the COVID period, to look at opportunities to drive new business models. So within that context, I suppose the key challenges that we had, and I'm not a hospitality person, I'm an ex-bureaucrat, but in terms of we need to meet the need of a group, the targeted group that I mentioned earlier, that didn't engage in training, very limited skills development, any form of skills development, no appetite for training courses, longer training courses. So one of our challenges is develop a model that will aim to attract, maintain their interest, mentor, and encourage them to complete their training. The other part, I suppose, that we had is to address some pretty rigid vocational training arrangements that do not provide the flexibility required to address the demand for skills, as John mentioned earlier, just in time for skills. So we had to look at designing a training product and promote the delivery of fast, practical, engaging and just-in-time training to address their current business needs. So in terms of what we needed is to look at an innovative approach to upgrade the skills of a group who generally preferred to engage in bite-sized on-the-job learning. Our challenge was to provide access to training that was shorter, more engaging, and responded directly to their business need. And we also needed, and a key point that John made was, there was a need to determine point-in-time needs of individual operators and then serve up these micro-credentials as discrete skills to meet those particular needs. Sorry, Venessa, Suresh, John, want to add anything?
Yeah, look, I'll happily add a couple of things if happy, Jim. So I think
Delighted,
in terms,
Suresh.
hey,
I'm delighted.
thank you so much. Look, I think in terms of developing micro-credentials, okay, and any concerns that we might have had at the time, I think put it in the context of we were just in the phase of coming through COVID. Okay, now at that stage we had certainly in the restaurant and catering sectors, we'd lost about 250,000 people through COVID. We had the lockdown. 250,000 people had gone necessarily as a result of COVID. So it was really up to us then to turn around and say, well, all right, fine. In the context of we've just lost 250,000 people, what do we need to do in order to re-recruit people? What do we need to do in order to skill people up, in terms of recruitment, selection, onboarding, mentoring and the like. So those micro-credentials became a really critical focus for us. And back in at that time, some 18 months ago, that was critical. And it's become even more so now in terms of, and I think John hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier on, and that is, what are our immediate needs? And it's not just the immediate need for the employer, but it's also the employee or the student as well. So I think those things are things that we need to be concerned with and have at front of mind.
And I would probably just like to add to that as well, that we were dealing with a workforce that were very time poor. So we needed to create a program that was going to be, like John has said, just in time, that they could do short, sharp, and anywhere that they wanted to be able to do it. And we just needed to be able to provide them with the learning content to be able to meet those needs.
But look, I'd actually echo that. I think that's exactly right. And so particularly when you're then, recruiting and retraining a whole workforce and getting back into the workforce, that time poor aspect is something that we really need to focus in on. And it's not just again for the employee or the student, but it's also takes in consideration the needs of the employer as well.
And I would just echo that as well, is that when we had the idea or the conception of this program, it wasn't necessarily looking at the learning aspect. It was actually looking at the business need and what it was that they required to be able to address issues they had with their onboarding or their soft or technical skills. So it wasn't really a focus on the learning aspect as much as it was on the business solution.
And at the end of the day, as you know, I mean, these are all just building blocks, right? So, you can get a micro-credential in a number of areas. They are building blocks and they contribute at the end of the day. So, to us and to our sector and our industry, they were absolutely critical.
Oh, thank you all. Very interesting. Now, I know that the micro-credentials platform bears the name of Tourism Training Australia, but it was actually, in fact, a very collaborative process. And there were a lot of stakeholders involved. What advice would you give other individuals who are working on these larger micro-credential projects on how to strengthen their own multi-stakeholder working relationships?
Well, in terms of, go on, sorry.
Go.
No, go on, you go.
Look, I'd say, in the context of these, and it's like any type of learning outcome, you've got to be engaging with all of your stakeholders in terms of, what's best in terms of outcomes for the individual, outcome for the industry, outcome for the employer. And when you get these types of engagements where you're looking at what is really good, I think that's when you actually get the best sort of outcome, rather than having a institutionalized approach to it, which says, well, the traditional chalk and talk that we would refer to as is going to prevail. Well, that doesn't work anymore. And it really does need to be a collaborative approach to learning and development, which actually gives you a really good outcome. And sorry, Jim, I cut in on you. I'll throw to you.
No, that's fine. There was look, the project, the TTA project, was based on formal arrangements with key hospitality, tourism, and or the peak hospitality, tourism, and travel associations across the country. It was important to have those formal arrangements. One, to determine the micro-credentials that we were going to offer, and John went through the list earlier in his presentation, but that was through a process of consultation and negotiation with all our partner agencies. There was also a need to work within the formal vocational education and training part of Australia, because most of our training platforms, or all of our training platforms and systems in Australia, have generally been configured to support accredited formal training programs and qualifications. So here we are. The proposed credentialing model was sort of challenging what was normally operated, and we had to look at how we could make modifications to accommodate our new training product constructs, our micro-credential design, how we'll engage, what sort of engagement and support models will be in place to support the cohort that we are targeting. And I suppose more importantly is how to connect these to the formal training system of units and qualifications. Because one of the challenges we had, and you said any pushback, was that initially we got pushback from government, particularly from the union perspective, that micro-credentials, as we proposed, were not going to be supported. The general arguments about fragmentation of qualifications, value of accredited versus not accredited training all came to the fore. So we had to design a micro-credential system that showed how the recognition, or that showed a recognition process that would link to formal qualifications. So basically, we had to design a system that showed how learners' acquisition of micro-credentials can provide a pathway to recognition for accredited units of competency in our system. And this involved a number of steps in terms of the project. It involved the mapping of our micro-credential topics or modules that Joan showed earlier to units of competencies within the formal hospitality, training, tourism and hospitality qualification framework. It also involved us to show, or the design of micro-credentials in such a way as they can be stacked or aggregated or packaged to look at how that leads to a unit of competency. We had to look at an independent assessment framework to ensure quality outcomes when we combine or aggregate those micro-credentials, and in such a way that would allow training organisations to make an assessment judgment. And we had to show how the process can provide the learner with qualification that was portable across the sector and aligns to realistic vocational outcomes as seen by the government at that stage, and that would generally through formal recognition process, through a formal transcript that, in our case in Australia, there was a statement of attainment that is issued by trusted providers and recognised training organisations. So I suppose in that case, I think we did enough to show the government that we were on the pathway to recognition as they initially asked us to do as part of the process.
And I would also add to that, the content of these courses being 10 to 15 minutes had to really cut through to the learner as well. That was our responsibility, so that when we put forward the competencies that have been stacked through to the RTOs or the TVETs, being the Suresh, at Restaurant and Catering, or whoever it was that we've partnered with, they had the evidence they needed in order to be able to provide that unit of competency.
Thank you all so much. We're running a bit short on time, so we're going to cut to the Q&A now because some members of the audience here have already expressed their interest in asking questions at this point. I don't know who's got the mic right now walking around. If anyone has a question, please raise your hand. Balbona, do you have any from the online? Do you want to start?
Yes, we actually do have a couple. One goes like this. In the German context, we talk about the so-called occupational principle. How then can you assure that your system is at the end qualifying persons to receive a broad competency profile?
John, I believe you're
The
muted.
micro-credential. Oh, am I?
We can hear you now.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The system is designed in such a way as to dovetail our achievement of skills through micro-credentials into our existing training system. And our existing training system is based on exactly the occupational profiling principles that are used in many countries, and as I understand it, including most European countries. So the alignment between the micro-credentials and the formal training system ensures that those principles of the skills, knowledge, and attitude that you need to do a job that is defined in our framework of competencies and qualifications are still the centrepiece of the system. All we're doing is mixing up the way that you get there and ensuring that you can get there in a way that is achieving what you need at a point in time when you need those skills. And then the process of wiring that to the formal training system is done in the back end by our AI engine that takes all the information that you've gained through those micro-credentials and wires it to the occupational profiling system that is our quality training framework.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Deal, did you want to? Okay.
Thank you. This was very enlightening for us. I have three just very general questions. First, they made me light up a couple of red bulbs, lights in my head. First, you were talking about overqualification in the traditional vet system. It's something that kind of contradicts our way to perceive vocational training. This one thing is, so overqualifying, was this a main problem in the past that you try to overcome? Second, is the system of micro-credentials targeted to replace the traditional vet system that has been working in your country? And third, maybe, is this what you have introduced, a project, or is it the consensus in your national vet community? Thank you.
Well, I'll do
I
the
can.
project. Oh, sorry, John, you go.
Look, qualification. This is something that is probably more in the context of tourism and hospitality parts of the system than it is for other industries. A lot of our model was based on the higher level vet quals. So in our system, diplomas and advanced diplomas, which are at our qualification level 5 and 6, meant that many students were going to a college in an institutional environment, undertaking a 2-year program that taught them from base level technical skills all the way into supervisory and management skills. They came out 2 years later with all those skills and then went back into a hospitality or tourism workplace and started at the bottom again. And even though they'd done 2 years worth of learning in an institution, they would then come out and be working as a as a waiter or be working as a tour consultant, and starting at the bottom and working their way up. This is what I refer to as overskilling. We've given them all those skills in advance, and they're not going to use them immediately when they come out of their training environment into the workplace. We've given them a whole lot of skills that they're not going to use for some years. And that's why I refer to this environment being a just-in-time environment, giving them the skills at the point at which they need them, not 2 years previously through an institutionalised delivery. This project is a pilot project, but I'll hand over to Jim to sort of take you through that part of the question.
It is a pilot project. It's, like I said earlier, it's part of an initiative in the state government that looks at innovative approaches to upskilling, reskilling, multi-skilling. The idea is at the end of it, it will lead into policy, but it's not within policy at the moment. And like I said, there is some convincing in some areas to see that the micro-credentialing approach is one that works, but it's not there. I think one of the key things in this project is that it's not there to replace normal vocational education and training. It's there to, as John said, lead into it. It's a system that allows you to do micro-credentials, but through the AI platform that's being developed, it allows learners, if they need, to be able to get a qualification and as a unit of competency as part of it. That's built into the system, so it's not either or, it's part of it, which is one thing that we had to show.
And in that AI
If I
process
could just,
as well, sorry, Suresh, did you want to go?
well, if I could just add to what Jim and John were saying, and I think John, said it quite well. This suits the tourism sector. It's certainly, so to the person who asked the question, this would not suit other sectors and industries. I spent 12 odd years in building and construction, and I don't think that this type of approach would suit building and construction, but it is very well suited to the tourism sector and the hospitality sector. So sorry, back over to you, Vanessa.
No, that's okay. What I've loved about watching this come to life is the cross-functional training as well. So if you've got a hospitality venue that have got a culinary team, they don't get taught soft skills during their training, and this gives that cross-functional aspect as well. So it's really upskilling a workforce in the true concept of that.
Thank you all for your insights. And with that, I think we're running a bit short on time again. So we're going to move directly into the second panel. These discussions that we've been hearing are omnipresent across all of the different BILT regions and across different TVET stakeholder groups. So it's important also to hear some different regional perspectives from other parts. So with that in mind, I would like to dive right into our second panel, getting micro-credentials on the agenda. How can policymakers, industry, and TVET providers work together to develop digital credentials that target in-demand skills? So joining us for this segment, we will leave Venessa here. And I would like to also ask to call to the stage Mr. Tuan Ki Ao, the Deputy Director and CEO at Temasek Polytechnic in Singapore, and Ms. Zahida Valley, Research Officer at JET Educational Services South Africa. And joining us also online is Mr. Anatoly Garmesh, Expert in Qualifications at the European Training Foundation. Welcome, everyone. So, in our previous example, we touched on how local factors had forged the development of this micro-credential platform. Regional differences are also responsible for shaping the debate around the usefulness of micro-credentials and the role they play in the future of TVET. So Vanessa, I would like to start with you on this one. This then begs the question, who was driving the demand for the micro-credentials within the different regions? And with the Tourism Training Australia project, was that more from a policymaker or a practice level that you saw?
So the demand is being driven by the tourism and the hospitality sector. They need the skills and they want the solutions like we've been talking about for their business problems. And they wanted them straight away. So we had to build a model that was built on the real-time solutions, and the micro-credentials tick those boxes for us. And what was your second part of that question?
So the second part of the question was, you essentially answered it, who was driving the demand, basically? Was it the policymakers or the practice level? And as you said, the industry was the main driver for you?
The industry was the main driver for us.
Okay. So I know ETF takes a more cross-regional look at micro-credentials. So I'd be curious to learn if you see more commonalities or differences across the European regions. Could you comment on that, Anatoly, for us? We seem to have lost you online.
Yeah. Do you see me?
We don't see you in the room. Text. There you go. Hello, welcome.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, indeed, we started our work with our partner countries, just asking the same question: whether what is the understanding of micro-credentials by different stakeholders in different countries. And the European Training Foundation, we are the agency that work with non-EU countries. These are mostly countries neighboring the EU and countries of Central Asia. But we started with a survey to find out understanding of micro-credentials. And we got response not only from our partner countries, but actually we got response from 60 countries around the world. So what we found out from our survey, this was that the very term of micro-credentials, this term is used as an umbrella term for different types of credentials. These are credentials, first of all, that certify small learning experiences. We already mentioned today that they're relevant for upskilling, reskilling adults. So these are credentials that certify short training courses, both in formal and non-formal settings, but they also may be the certificates that certify parts of formal education and training programs, such as units of learning, such as modules. And in this case, we observed that in our partner countries, micro-credentials may be even called as partial qualifications, as micro-qualifications. But on the other side, these are certificates that certify demonstrated competence, and this is what was discussed in the previous panel. This may be professional certificates, certificates awarded by the industry bodies, as well as micro-credentials are relevant for certificates that certify results of recognition of prior learning, results of validation of non-formal and formal learning. So overall, what our survey showed, it showed that micro-credentials are relevant for all learning settings, formal, non-formal, informal. They're relevant for all types of providers, and these are not learning providers as training organizations, but they are relevant for providers that issue certificates based on assessment only. These are such as assessment centers, such as certification bodies. We noticed that there are common principles for the development, for the design and the issuance of micro-credentials. We already touched upon this today, that micro-credentials should be based on assessment. They need to be quality assured. They need to be relevant both for labor market and for the learners as well. They need to be focused on some skills and competencies. They need to be stackable. So these are principles. These principles are common for different continents, for different regions. And also what we saw that instruments and tools that are used in formal education and training, that are used in qualification systems, that they can also be applied to micro-credentials. such as credit systems, such as inclusion into national qualification framework. They can be used, micro-credentials can be used to certify the results of validation, non-formal and formal learning. They could use the same quality assurance standards as informal education system. So these commonalities in European region, they are reflected in the European approach to micro-credentials. They are reflected in a European common definition of micro-credentials. And Jessica already started today with a proposed UNESCO global definition of micro-credentials. These commonalities, they are reflected in European principles for the design and issuance of micro-credentials and in standard elements to describe micro-credentials to ensure the transferability and interoperability of information of micro-credentials, which is also important when we publish micro-credentials on digitalized platforms. So what we see, these are more commonalities about different understanding of micro-credentials across regions. Thank you.
Very interesting, thank you. Chuan Ki, I was wondering if you could talk about the collaborative project that you're currently working on that's trying to develop a competency-based stackable micro-credential pathway at TMSEC. And who are the drivers for this pilot project? And what are some of the different viewpoints that you've seen from your partners?
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Before I answer the specific question, I think it's useful to take one step back and understand the context of what we are discussing. And for me, essentially, going back to what Jessica started with the first slide on the UNESCO report that came out in 2022, a definitional statement on micro-credentials. But let's drop micro for a moment. Talk about credentials. I think largely credentials are made up of both macro and micro. And I think there is a role and continued role for macro-credentials because macro-credentials refers to the diplomas, to the degrees, to the certifications, to the licensings that all of us in the TVET community has embarked on for years and years. And for many established regions, especially like the European Union, has come out with qualification framework. And I would say that is a lot of work to support the macro-credentials part of the qualification, which all of us still have to do because it provides a foundational basis of body of knowledge and skills for a start. And then we talk about micro-credentials. And micro-credentials are a bit different in the sense that it is really required as a result of how the Industrial Revolution has come upon us, how technology has come upon us, how COVID, a pandemic, has kind of forced us to rethink the way we do things. Let me give you a specific example for the COVID, for the hospitality and tourism sector, especially the restaurant in Singapore. They went through a macro-credentials. They have very good qualification in hospitality and tourism and restaurants and F&B. That is good because that teaches them how to run and drive the business. But during COVID, what we saw was an increased interest in the micro-credential in multimedia skill sets, in the ability to create an online presence, in the ability to understand what does it mean to create an online payment system, in the ability to be able to create a system that will allow supply chain to continue despite the various shutdown. That has nothing to do with hospitality and tourism, but it was a micro-credential absolutely crucial for the industry to rebound. So I think there is a difference between the macro-credentials, which will continue will be a role where all of us will play, and there will be an increasing importance on micro-credentials. Going back to the specific question on competency-based stackable credentialing framework that we have embarked in Singapore. Our key sponsors, the Ministry of Education, have brought together all the universities, the Polytechnic and the Institute of Education to come together to look at competency-based curriculum. And this can be in the form of the module certificates that we've been talking about. But most importantly, that this individual module must be stackable, potentially to be a full qualifications. But let me just mention that this is actually largely meant for working adults. It's not for your 15, 16, 17-year-old that we are working with, because that falls within the macro-credentials part of it. But the competency stackable micro-credential is important for a working adult. So as a TVET provider, in fact, I was just sharing with many colleagues here that my focus in the next few years is not on my pre-employment training of my 15, 16, 17 years old. It's with my continuous education training of that 30-year-old, that 40-year-old, and that 50-year-old who needs to pivot, adjust, and unskill, reskill, retool to be able to compete in the challenges that we are facing today. And that's where micro-credentials come in very importantly for that working adult. And that's why we have embarked on this mission, and my minister has made it very clear that this is the way that we're going to go towards. We started with the Singapore Institute of Technology as the first university to do that. In fact, his vision and his hope that all our modules, they are competency and stackable, will eventually be portable across all the institutions. And that's something that we're working through at this point, from the Institute of Training to the Polytechnic to the university, to be more portable across. Yeah.
Thank you, Tuan Kee. That's very interesting. So you see micro-credentials fitting in more in this continuous training or multi-skilling, upskilling, reskilling aspect. I would like to now pivot to Zahida here. And which sectors are making use of micro-credentials in South Africa and as well and beyond, if you can speak to those points? And what are two of the main advantages you see in micro-credentials and two common points of criticism? And perhaps you share similar views to Tuan Kee that they're only applicable or more applicable to lifelong learning in these aspects. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. So I'll start with the sectors. So in South Africa in particular, we're seeing a focus on digital skills, the ICT sector, but in further research that Chet is doing across the continent, so in countries such as Burundi and Uganda, we're also seeing some offerings in agriculture and in entrepreneurship as well. In South Africa in particular, we're also seeing green skills on the uprise, so many offerings in the field of green energy in particular, and for example, like solar installation. So those are in addition to traditional engineering courses that you might have. And I'm sure, as you all know, South Africa has a major energy crisis, so alternative sources of energy such as solar installation is on high demand. Yeah, so I think those are mostly the sectors that are involved. I'd like to just speak about the target market a little bit. So it's a little different from what Tuan mentioned, but in Africa we're seeing a lot of focus on unemployed youth, NEET youth, youth on the move, and the courses are mostly directed towards these groups. A lot of the courses have a self-development orientation, so developing transversal skills that could be used across sector as well. Yeah, and then I think in terms of advantages and disadvantages, so I do think micro-credentials have the ability to positively influence youth employment, but it has to be coupled, and I think this was mentioned a few times over the course of the conference, that it has to be coupled with labor market demands. Inputs from employers are critical, industry partners as well. The stacking of micro-credentials were mentioned a lot today already, and I think with the possibility of stacking, learners are in full control of their pathways, their career pathways. And as we see the development and the implementation of digital forms of credentials and platforms, they can be fully in control of their data, like Venessa and the Australian example. So I think those are broadly some advantages. Some disadvantages, I think Jet was working with the ILO, with UNICEF, along some case studies on micro-credentials. And I think the lack of a firm common definition that's understood by many is bringing about a lot of confusion with regards to what the term means, what it encompasses. Is it a short course? Is it, many forms of credentials? What exactly is it? I also think the lack of clear guidelines and standards for implementation, also in terms of recognition and evaluation, is a challenge when it comes to micro-credentials in realizing its full potential. Thanks.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about how micro-credentials can support macro learning or lifelong learning or extended learning. I'd like to talk a little bit about a topic that we haven't brought up quite yet, recognition of prior learning. How can we use micro-credentials to certify skills that were learned through non-formal education? And looking at this point then, how can we have, for example, policymakers foster the development of micro-credentials that can assist in these processes and also help then with labor market mobility? Zahida, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I think, and as I mentioned already, I think a framework, guidelines, standards for micro-credentials could be quite useful and would be the first stepping stone. And I think it could be, it should be, not could be, it really should be constructed in collaborative manners. So inputs from training institutions, from industry partners, from employers as well. There also has to be flexibility in current policies. Which allow training institutions like the TVET colleges in South Africa to bring in these non-traditional training courses. We've seen 1 or 2 colleges in South Africa that have been able to implement it, and it's because the policy environment allows for it. I can't say the same for all African countries. I don't have that background, but I think a flexible policy environment does definitely assist. And then I think more research has to be done in terms of the impact of micro-credentials, particularly on the labor market. And I think because the target in Africa in particular is on unemployed youth, is it actually translating into employment and entry into the labor market for these individuals? Another note that I'd like to, and it was raised I think yesterday or the day before, was with regards to the ACQF initiative. So I think it's important for policymakers just to keep up to date with the parallel processes that are taking place so that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel. And building on these processes that are already underway on the continent. I think it's really important to keep in mind elements such as credit banks, credentialing platforms, which research is currently going to start in South Africa with JET, but also more broadly looking at quite a number of African countries and in partnership with a few different research partners. So I think, I'm from a research organization, so maybe I would push for the research, but I think it really is necessary. Thanks.
So I know, Venessa, with your project, we had mentioned that you used AI, trigger-based marketing, to try to find potential users for your platform. Because this was one point that was mentioned earlier as well, that there are micro-credentials out there, but learners might not know it's available to them. So for those individuals that are out there that potentially already have learned skills in the non-formal sector, how can they get these skills accredited? What are different ways that we can reach out to them? If you would maybe talk about that a bit.
Sure, thanks, Jessica. So that was the why for our program. You know, it was to create this AI type of infrastructure that will target or position these courses for people that are looking for the needs of these skills at a particular time. And we did that, whether it be, you would have seen from John's slides, whether that had been through Google, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. These were all the learnings that we were looking for because we didn't have the answers. So where was the sweet spot? What was going to generate that AI and connect back to the learner? So that's where we developed the learner journey based on our assumptions that we've been pivoting the entire way through because it's just a constant fine-tuning. But it's been such an interesting project and program to understand that learner behaviour. And with the AI, it really comes down to understanding your target audience, building the personas, and then attracting and targeting those learners in that particular way in which they're searching for these answers. You know, if someone's Googling on Google, I've had a customer complaint and I don't know how to deal with it, we would like to think that our course will come up at that time through the triggers that they've just connected with, that we've built in the back end of Google that have targeted that particular behaviour. So it's quite broad. We have a pretty large target audience, and we've been refining it all the way through this project to understand exactly where that AI needs to connect. I hope that makes sense. It's a big beast.
It made perfect sense. Thank you. Okay. So I'll move then to our last question, and then afterwards we can open up the floor again for our next Q&A segment. So when we talk about lifelong learning, we also speak sometimes of shared responsibilities. So this is often portrayed as a tug of war between government, private sector, and workers' responsibilities. And this becomes a question of whether or not lifelong learning is a public good or a shared responsibility, and how does this balancing act affect pre-existing societal inequalities? It's a tough one. So, who in the end is ultimately responsible then for lifelong learning? Moreover, how do these different shared responsibilities among TVET stakeholders play out? And how does this shape the conversation around the use of digital micro-credentials? Anatoly, would you like to pick up this one first?
Thank you. I can start answering this question. I fully agree with the role of micro-credentials that what was emphasized at the beginning of today's event, that micro-credentials would have key role in life and learning policies. And I think that when we are talking about shared responsibility, we need to look, for me, it's more a question of a relevancy of micro-credentials, how to ensure that micro-credentials are relevant for employers, for labor market, how to ensure that micro-credentials are relevant for learners, how to ensure that they're relevant for providers of micro-credentials themselves. So relevance, for me, relevance of micro-credentials for learners, it means that micro-credentials should be learner-centered, that providers need to work to give learners opportunity to follow micro-credentials in a different format, in different times, in different places. And that's why we now observe that more and more, there is more and more emphasis on the importance of hybrid learning, of an online learning, including that providers need to ensure e-learning, online e-learning materials, including for virtual reality learning experiences. Then providers need to think about that micro-credentials should support flexible learning pathways that was mentioned already today. And for example, providers could design micro-credentials as part of their formal education, formal education and training programs or linked to them. This means that a learner from the very beginning should see a path from micro-credentials to a formal education, should see a path from micro-credential to a credential, major credential to a qualification from the very beginning. Then providers should think about recognition of micro-credentials, of course. Providers need to design policies for recognition of micro-credentials from different providers, including from providers from non-formal, informal learning providers. This would facilitate different alternative ways for a learner to access formal education and training. And of course, combination of validation and training opportunities is very much important, as micro-credentials could play here a key role. Micro-credentials could facilitate short training, as well as they could certificate recognition, could certificate the results of recognition of prior learning. As well, when we talk about micro-credentials, we often say about, often thinking about supporting adult upskilling and reskilling of adults, but I think micro-credentials can enhance initial employment for young people. That's why we think about shared responsibility. We think about collaboration with relevant stakeholders outside education and training institutions. For example, micro-credentials could be integrated in continuous professional development schemes of employment of employers. They could be integrated into active labor market policies by public employment policies. And of course, yes, I fully agree that there should be some framework, policy framework for micro-credentials at national level, some guidance, policy guidance at national level, a common definition of micro-credentials. And for this, for example, this year we published guidelines for developing and recognizing of micro-credentials to support providers in developing credentials, outcome-based credentials that could be recognized as micro-credentials. And we also provide policy-level recommendations to support recognition of micro-credentials at national level. Thank you. Thank you.
The only thing that I wanted to add was, building on that, the Australian government has actually just announced the Skills Passport wallet. So all of the credentials and accreditations are able to be transported nationally now and potentially internationally recognised. So we're quite proud of that step forward as well.
Tuanki, yes?
Yeah, can I just add shared responsibilities? Yes, of course. The question, how do you do it? And where I come from, we believe in a trio helix structure. So if you're familiar with helix structure, it's a spiral structure, but it's a trio, and a trio involving the first three I's: industry, institution, and individual. It cannot be horizontal structure. It has to be helix structure. And let me give you three specific examples. In TVET, UNESCO-UNEVOC BILT discussion, we have talked about sustainability, green skills, digitization. So I mentioned about micro-credentials, right? So in sustainability, you could be, you got a diploma, a degree in engineering, etc. So that's what you go through first. But in order to be able to deal with sustainability issue at our local level, we came out with micro courses in a baseline audit of the current functions of the company. That can be delivered through a micro-credentials. It may not be a macro-credential, but it's a very important micro-credentials that support the work of sustainability. First example. Second example, we're talking about green skills. So somebody could be diploma, degree in engineering, civil, environmental science. That's macro-credentials. But what we're delivering in terms of the micro part of it is energy auditing. Because if you really want to save the world and to be green, we need to focus on the in situ buildings, the buildings that's already been built, which are inefficiently designed, rather than new buildings. And that's what we are looking at. And the micro learning course that we have come up with is energy auditing. That's a micro-credential. The third example, digitization. I mean, we have been talking at length about digitization, but what's practical for many industry that we found out is about a micro-credential course in RPA, robotic process automation. Because we are all squeezed with resource constraint, we need to be more efficient and we need to increase the productivity. So there was a micro-credential, micro-learning course in RPA processes, which actually every sector found it very useful because they were able to robotize a lot of their processes. That can be delivered as a micro-credentials. So we need to have a strategy. And the strategy is really about looking at the three I's. And the three I's, the industry will tell us which are the areas they need. The institution like us will be the one delivering the courses. And the individual must make the effort and commitment and time to attend those courses. And after they have attended with those micro-credentials, and digital badge, they become more employable, they become more competitive within their domain, within their sector. And I think these are the specific examples that we have been trying on the ground in order to kind of demyth or to clarify, the notion of what credentialing is all about. It's not another effort or policy. It's to make you more efficient, to make you more economically competitive. And that's why at the ASEAN TVET Council, we have 3 representatives from the government, one from the Labour Ministry, Manpower, one from the Trade and Investment Ministry, and one from the Education Ministry. And that goes back to that industry, institution, and individual that have to come together to ensure that the credentials that they get will allow them to be able to be more efficient and more productive and more competitively competent in whatever areas in the skills. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tuanki. With our remaining minutes here, I would like to move directly into the Q&A. Does anyone here in the audience have a question? Please raise your hand. Here in the, I think you have a mic. You can just push the button and turn on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Kipkirui Langat from Kenya. And I want to pick it from my good friend Tuan Ki, mentioned that for us to really appreciate and accommodate the issue of micro-credential is the reason behind why we are going to this direction. And I think he gave a very good account of what COVID-19 taught us. We saw a completely shut down in some sectors of economy, for example, in hospitality industry, aviation industry, where so many people lost jobs. And there were also demand on the other side, for example, in health sector and logistics. And there were people who wanted to change careers, but because of lack of opportunities to be able to do that, it was very difficult. So in the background of changing job environment and changing of careers, I think it is more important now at this stage to start looking at how do we break down our diplomas, our full qualification into units of competencies that will be able to allow people, even those who are in different jobs, to be able to learn these skills in case they want to change jobs. We have also seen, and especially I want to speak from the background of the sub-Saharan Africa, where we have so many people who have not been able to go to formal training, but they have been learning on the informal training. They have certain level of qualification which we are not able to ascertain. So if again we are going to put this one within our qualification framework so that we are able to support those individuals, maybe through prior learning and love learning, it is going to be important. Finally, is how do we learn from the best practice so that because one of the reasons why TVET has not been very popular is because of what we call dead end. You get your diploma and that is it. How do we ensure that this is going to be part of education and training so that the micro-credential that we learn can be accumulated finally into a full qualification and you are able to continue within education and training to the highest level. I'm talking of making sure this being part of qualification framework and also a good system of credit accumulation transfer so that when you want to exit and enter into a system, there are very clear pathways. Thank you.
Does anyone want to respond? Tonki?
Thank you. Thank you for the comment, which is very, very pertinent. And that's why micro-credential has to be stackable and portable. The stackability and portability is crucial. And the point I made about COVID, just to give another example from home, we are very familiar with Singapore Airlines and the Singapore Airlines stewards and stewardess. But during COVID, as you know, there was no travel. What we did was, but they are in the service in line. There was a big effort to roll out a lot of these micro courses. And many of them pivoted to medical because we needed a lot of healthcare, the care sector. In fact, even after COVID, quite a number of them continue in the care sector, and there are several of them continue to pursue even specific nursing capabilities through all the courses and competencies that is required as part of nursing. And there are a couple of very successful stories of SIA stewardess who are now ER nurses because COVID allowed them to pivot in a sector that we traditionally think that they will not go into. But care and service, there are commonalities. So whatever they learned previously in the airline business for many years is also portable. And that's why we need to think about what are the adjacency sectors and also how do we pivot. And the strategy to pivot is important. And that's where micro-credentials come in as an important platform for us to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we are running out of time now. I would like to get back on the stage just so I could say goodbye to John, Jim, and Suresh. If IT could pull them up again. They may have gone to bed. Okay, that's what Venessa says. Perhaps they're offline and have gone to bed. So with that then, no, somebody's there. We can't see you. Ah, here we go. Hi, Jim. Thanks for waiting. And Suresh. Okay, wonderful. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today for both the panels. We've had an intense day, and I'm glad that you were here with us. I'll move now to the end of the presentation. Thank you, everyone. Let's see. We have our resources up. IT. I can see my slide, but I can't see it on the big screen. There we go. Thank you. I think we missed one. There we go. So just a quick note, we have some additional resources if you're interested on the left side of the screen, some peer learning from the BILT Community Learning Network, and then also some external resources, for example, the UNESCO Towards a Common Definition of Micro-Credentials that I mentioned earlier in my opening. Here are some of our upcoming BILT learning events on the left, and on the right, some upcoming release dates. For example, some new posts on our Atlas, Emerging Trends in TVET Online. Our next learning lab will be in spring 2024, date to be determined. You are free to follow us on social media. You can find BILT information under the UNESCO-UNEVOC, also through BIBB, and you can also join us on our new BILT Network page on LinkedIn. And as mentioned previously by Natalie, we have a feedback form. Traditionally, learning labs are online webinars, and they have their own feedback and monitoring evaluation. So we'd be very grateful if everyone today could please fill out the form and tell us what you think so we can constantly improve what we're doing here. And that's it for me. Thank you very much, everybody.